Now, we have an extra special guest today. Our CEO, Jim Whitehurst, has deigned to join me, is dared to join me on stage to do a little Q&A for the next 20 minutes. So if you could please welcome Jim, we'd really appreciate that. Hey, Jim.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming. All right. So I think you know who I am now, so I can take off my badge. So it's been an interesting year we've had here, slightly.
I think you could say that.
And there are a few things that I probably can't talk about, so don't even ask me to talk about them. But I really wanted to thank you for coming and kicking us off for this Red Hat Summit Week. And you've got a lot on your plate, so we're going to dive right into it. What is really interesting to me now is that everything is about open source collaboration. We know that businesses are moving really rapidly with complexity and all kinds of craziness happening now. But it takes a certain kind of leadership to take that open source collaboration model that we talk about at Red Hat all the time and move an organization like Red Hat forward and make it able to take advantage of open source collaboration. And I know you've had an interesting journey from Delta to Red Hat and here. If you could tell us a little bit first about that journey and how it shaped you and your thinking about this open source model.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I did have a great opportunity to see two extremes. I'll talk about, let me just first I'll say, I love the concept of the commons because we work a lot in upstream communities, which is great, but I think we've learned over time that so much knowledge and innovation comes from applying, it's user-driven innovation all the way through. And so having a collection of users that can also get together and share, I think is just a really powerful concept. And it's, in years past, just sitting around talking to people involved in the commons, it's amazing how people talk about the learnings that way, which is incredible. And it's such a key part of how innovation happens. And it does segue a little. So before Red Hat, I was Chief Operating Officer at Delta Airlines, which is sorry if I lost your bag. Always throw that in there because sometime in life I've probably lost everybody's bag in here, so sorry. But airlines are a very, very almost military, top-down, hierarchical, structured, functional organizations. And when you're trying to drive static efficiency, so in a very static environment where you have a set of knowns, that actually works pretty well. Like, okay, how do I get better at catering, or how do I get better at loading bags? And on a day-to-day basis, that kind of can fall apart at times. But in generally, they're pretty optimized organizations, again, for a static environment where you're not doing a lot of innovation. When I left there and I came to Red Hat, I got to be honest, the first 6 months, I thought, this place is chaos. I've been brought in to clean it up.
It is chaos.
Well, it is a little bit.
Organized chaos.
But it's hopefully a little bit managed chaos. I don't
Since you've
as a
been
manager, here. I don't know. So but what you learn over time is that if you are trying to optimize groups of people for innovation, it does fundamentally look different. And if you're used to a traditional management model, it looks a little bit like chaos. And what I mean by that is you go from directing to, I call it context building. So it's like, okay, how are you building the context for the people in your organization to do their best work and to innovate? And so as a leader, it becomes much less about, well, let me define a direction, kind of dictate how we get there, and then drive compliance to that plan. That works great, again, if you're trying to accomplish a kind of a known task. But if you're asking people to innovate, by definition, you don't know what the tasks are. Yeah. And so it becomes much more about, well, how do I create an environment where people feel comfortable taking risks, not only feel like they need to, they have to, a sense of urgency and ownership around that. How do you get people inspired to be thinking about it before they go to bed, when they wake up in the morning? It's like all of those components go into building a context for people to do their best work. And as a leader, it's almost odd because the day-to-day things that you would have done before, where you get really, really directive and say, go do this, or I'm going to hold you accountable for that, you kind of have to give that up, and you actually are managing more of a context. And that was hard for me, and I got lucky in that I didn't have to discover it and implement it. I had an organization that went from one to the other that was that way, and I had a chance to observe it. But even with that, it was just hard for me because you wonder, well, what's my role if I'm not in there kind of telling people what to do and holding them accountable?
Yeah, it's been a great journey. I've been here 5 years and got to watch all of this happen and unfold for lots of it. And there was another article that just floated by that you authored on LinkedIn. You've always said things like, traditional planning is dead, and things along that line at Red Hat Summit. He stood up and said that in front of the entire crowd. And the article that was written recently, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, was about how to plan in a world full of unknowns, in which you suggested, rather than waste precious time and energy trying to make predictions about something that is simply unknowable, an organization should instead focus on making itself ready for potential disruptions. And I really love that because along with the context, it's about a different kind of leadership and a different kind of planning. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you were thinking writing that article and how going from traditional planning is dead to planning for disruptions? How do you do that? How do you get teams to do that?
Well, a story around it that I don't think I put in there, and I'll hide the names since I haven't asked for permission on this. So I was at a board meeting of a major academic medical institution, and we had a new chancellor, and he was running through their 5-year plan and what they were going to do. And then all of a sudden, one of the other board members raises their hand, and this other board member used to be CEO of one of the big 3 automakers in the US, and said, look, I understand all of that you're doing. He said, but in my business, we spent billions of dollars a year on R&D, and then this little company called Uber comes along, had at the time spent very, very little and completely disrupted our business. How are you going to plan for that? And when he first asked that, I said, that's really kind of an obnoxious question because, how do you plan for something that disruptive? I mean, that's kind of a very unfair question. But the more I thought about it, that is actually one of the most important questions that all of us need to ask because we are living in a world where that much disruption is happening. Mm-hmm. And you can't say, well, I can't plan for it, so I'm going to do nothing. And the more you reflect on it, that's where I kind of came around to this concept of just because you don't know what change is going to happen, change will happen and it'll happen fast. So how do you prepare yourself for it, right? So it becomes much more about, okay, well, how do I build the capability in my organization for people to have the right skills, knowledge, and also the right authorities to, as they see things, to be able to change? I think it almost looks like a computing architecture as well. You say, let me do a more horizontal, layered kind of approach to your organization. So when you have really strong silos, it's really hard for people to get the message that something's changed across it all. So how you think about a more modular type of organization structure, it's making sure that you hold people accountable to broad objectives, but you don't hold people accountable to very specific initiatives, which might need to change, and now you're holding them accountable for something that's the wrong thing. Yep. And that happens in so many organizations. And so it's a very different way that you have to think about if you back up and say, again, I'm not smart enough to know where the world's going to be in 5 years, but how do I try to enable an organization that'll be able to react more quickly than others to be successful? Yeah.
We saw that even with OpenShift. When I first joined, we were a platform as a service running on MongoDB, a Ruby and Rails app, and then along came this little thing called Kubernetes. And what was amazing to me was being inside of a team and an engineering group that could pivot that quickly, that was enabled to and empowered to make those kinds of pivots and changes when technology changes that quickly. And in terms of speed and magnitude, that was a huge shift for OpenShift and for the company, and the kind of style of collaboration internally and externally that we have seen grown up inside of Red Hat is really what's helped make that happen.
Well, and the willingness of people, because we built this over time, the acceptance of, hey, we went down this path, it wasn't the right path, we're going to have to pivot, or we made the best decision at the time, but it's okay to pivot. Building that in, that's really, really hard because human beings don't like to admit they went down the wrong path. And often you went down the wrong path not because you made a mistake, it was with the best information you had at the time. Yep. And building that willingness to make a pivot is something we tried really hard to build in our culture. Again, that's why I was going to come back, at least for Red Hat. We have no intellectual property at all, right? So how do we build a durable, sustainable competitive advantage if it's not around ownership of IP, it really has to be around culture and capability that we build. And capability is often knowledge in people's heads, and they can be hired away. So it can't be individual knowledge. It really has to be how you build a culture of people working together. And that's something we've been really focused on, because that's the only way we can continue to have confidence in our success going forward.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful journey to watch that in technology, but we also see it like in the acronyms that we use, like cloud native and IoT and all of these wonderful phrases. A hybrid cloud is the big one this year. And you've spoken a lot about digital transformation. And since we have a lot of customers and folks in the room, I thought maybe one thing we could get you to explain again, because I've heard you talk about it a lot, is what does digital transformation mean to you today? As we've talked about it for the past 2 or 3 years at different aspects of it. But where is it today, digital transformation?
So I'm going to try out a new analogy, because it's just happened to me last week. So we'll see if this works or not.
Go for it.
So I have twins. They're juniors in high school. And so they're right in the middle of writing papers. And I remember unfortunately, many decades ago when I used to do that. And one was writing a term paper, and one had a creative writing assignment. And I remember for myself, so I have a degree in computer science. I'm very kind of oriented, left brain. And I used to hate doing creative writing, because this idea of just the idea of being creative is hard. Give me a term paper to write, like a book report or a history paper, no problem, I can nail those. And it is so fundamentally different when you're trying to totally create something new than when you're trying to elucidate on a topic, or kind of whatever you might do in a history paper where you take an opinion or whatever you do. And I think one of the biggest problems, whether it's happened in technology or what is happening in enterprises at large, the primary way that we are creating value going forward is no longer further leveraging the economies of scale or scope or standardization and all the things that most large businesses created value on and continued to execute against. Now, so much of value creation is around innovation and creating new things. And I almost like the word, I'm going to use this a little more tomorrow in my keynote, creation rather than innovation, because one could argue, a lot of people will use the word innovation even when they're automating something and because they're doing it new, which is great and wonderful and important stuff. But so much of what we do and so much of what we see enterprises doing on OpenShift is like literally creating whole new businesses and new ways to engage with customers. And that requires a very, very, very different way to think, to actually create something and make real that didn't exist before, right? And so back to your question around transformation, to me it's a little bit an organization where you're trying to take hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people to accomplish a task. The task in the traditional world was optimizing in a relatively known sphere. And it's not that people didn't innovate, but if you're an automaker or a bank or an airline, there were new things you could do, but it was kind of a known environment. Now for almost every business, digital has enabled such radical new things that could happen, as well as orthogonal challenges to the business that you would never expect. That value creation more and more is about how you imagine something that doesn't exist and make it real. And so digital transformation, at least in my mind, it's how do you now organize people, right, in your business to be better capable at innovating, at creating than your competitors. And so, yeah, there are methodologies like Agile and DevOps are a piece of that, but it really comes, it's philosophy, it's culture, it's leadership, it's behavior, it's a whole set of things that have to come together to enable a large organization to innovate at scale. Because recognize, if you started from scratch, it would be easier, but you're starting with a legacy organization that's probably really, really good at doing whatever they did in the industrial world, right? And so now you got to take an organization that's really good at something and say, how do we pivot or augment on top of that with a new set of skills, which is really hard. And the heart of digital transformation is that. And so, yeah, technology is a part of it, methodology is a part of it, but a big part of it is just around leadership and mindset and culture.
Yeah, cool. So you'd also talked about your perspective on Red Hat's innovation model. So maybe now you're calling it their creation model or something, as being unique, and you called it a three-piece model. Not really like a three-piece suit, but can you explain a little bit about that, how that weaves into this?
Yeah, so I think for any organization, really being able to understand how the pieces of your organization come together to create whatever your source of competitive advantage is really important. And you know, as Red Hat's built over time, and I've really started trying to get crisper on this, on all honesty, to be able to better communicate with folks at IBM about it. But I do think there are three pieces of what makes us capable of doing what we're doing in terms of innovation. There's one is how we innovate with upstream communities. And we've done that for a long time. I think most people, and reasonably so, see that as kind of a core of Red Hat, is how we work in upstream communities to develop great software. But I think more and more, when I go out and talk to our customers and I talk to Red Hat associates, almost equally important to that is how we engage with our customers to co-create. Yeah. And so, you know, on the negative side, you know, we often will come in and say, oh, God, we come in there with basically a bunch of Lego pieces and make our customers put it together. Mm-hmm. But when you go out and talk to a lot of our customers, maybe they like a little bit more baked, but in general say, what I like about that is we're involved with you in co-creating. So you're not here trying to offer us a fully baked solution, you know, and most customers don't, most enterprises I talk to, at least our customers, don't want a fully baked give it to me solution because they want to be involved in it. They want it to be bespoke. They want it to be authentic to them and their customers. They want to be engaged in solving those problems. They want to co-create. And so our engagement model with our customers, which I do think is more focused around co-creation and collaboration, I think is an important part of that. And then the final piece is we could not do it without having extraordinary people who are passionate about it. So our employee engagement model and how we work to build our culture internally, but how we've really worked to build a purpose-driven organization around open source so we can attract some of the most extraordinary talent and retain that talent in a world where, I mean, Kubernetes is like crazy hot right now. And be able to have such extraordinary people at Red Hat are, I think, because people enjoy the culture, they feel like they're part of a mission, they see real impact that they can have. And so the employee value proposition around internal collaboration and purpose and passion, I think, is really important. And you put those three things together, we can have extraordinary people with a DNA of working upstream with communities and a desire to build deeply co-collaborative relationships with our customers. I think you put those three things together, that's how I would define our innovation model in total. And if any one of those wasn't there, I don't think the whole could stay together, right? If we were great at working in upstream communities and with customers, but we didn't have the employee engagement model we have, I think our associates would leave and then the whole thing melts down. And you know, you could pick any one of those. I think they're all three are kind of co-equal in importance in terms of allowing us to do what we do.
I think if anyone here has ever heard me talk, I talk a lot about cross-community collaboration, and what you're describing is even internally cross-community collaboration across silos and projects, whether it's middleware or the OpenShift team or the OpenStack team or the monitoring Prometheus team, the network of connections that we make and the passion of people that work on these projects is amazing. And trying to, one of the things that I threw up a picture, and if anyone wants to see it again later, of this sort of jellyfish diagram of where all the network of people working on the projects is going. And it allows me to see when people are migrating to a new project, so the next Prometheus, the next Jaeger, the next Knative, or whatever it is, you can start to see when the thought leaders and the contributors are moving to the next package or project in a GitHub repo. But it's very hard sometimes to see where the market forces are moving. So I'm wondering what you think, what next market force we should be watching about. We're going to see a lot of great talks today, and some of them I've got sneak previews of. They're going to blow your minds. But from your perspective, sitting in the hot seat, where do you see the market force driving us next?
Well, let me say a couple things. I sleep well at night because I think we've built the capability in our organization to quickly see and pivot to where things are going. So if you're going to rely on what I'm about to say, I would be selling Red Hat stock short right now because I have no better radar than anyone else. What I would say though, and I think it's sort of interesting that we can kind of already see this with what's happening, on top of the container platform, which is, and you see this in academia, it's where disparate fields come together, where you start to see really, really interesting new sources of innovation. And so you see universities are often doing this now, where they try to get academic departments to co-locate or create cross departmental efforts,
yeah.
right? And so what's interesting to me about this container platform is it literally is changing almost everything about how an application is going to be built and be run. So all of a sudden, you have the potential at a technology level for security and networking to be working potentially more close together. Or you can kind of pick any of these kind of sets where I think there's going to be really interesting innovation that happens in what does a fully managed, at scale, mature, container platform, enterprise application portfolio look like when it's running on a container platform at scale in 5 years. I think it's going to be just extraordinary to see, and I don't think we know what that management paradigm fully looks like, and we have a lot of people working on the pieces. From a business perspective, to me, it's where IoT and AI machine learning come together. And that to me, I don't know exactly what the insights out of that are going to be, but it is going to be extraordinary. I mean, these are the things that are going to revolutionize medicine and actually enable autonomous driving. And so it's really those two things coming together. And I'm thrilled to see what happens there.
So in OpenShift Commons, we have a lot of SIGs. We just started an AI ops SIG. So for me, one of the most mind-blowing things is watching AI be applied to the ops side of running OpenShift or running any infrastructure, and the partners that we're bringing on board is just mind-blowing. We have an ML SIG. We have a SIG for just about everything, so if you'd like to join, let me know. But you're totally right on. We'll have the telco folks on stage, the FSI folks, and it's when we bring those people together with the technology folks and they cross-pollinate that we get some of the most amazing advances in the features and the functions that get requested. So
it's going to be an extraordinary next few years.
So we've run over a little bit, but I have one final question for you. If the folks in the room took away just one thing from today, what would you have them take away?
To me, I think getting around this mindset that whether you lead a team, so how you lead, or how you engage with the people you work with, if you're a contributor on a team, the nature of how you work together, the nature of those interactions will determine your ability to create and be innovative. And it's something that I do worry too many people who've grown up like I have in a more of a traditional world and way of operating now say, oh, there's kind of shiny new tools and new things to do over here. I'm going to apply the same approach. Recognizing it really, you can try Agile all day long or DevOps, you can put in a container platform, et cetera, but unless you change the way that you're leading, if you change your behaviors, change the way you participate if you're on a team, it's going to be really hard to be successful, because getting people to get out of their comfort zone, to take risks, to encourage people to do that, to get people to be, I swear in the shower is probably one of the best ideas have ever been created, right? How do you get people to be thinking about that versus Game of Thrones? That's hard right now, I admit.
I know.
But, it's how do you inspire people to do that? It's all of those things. It's the soft side that is so incredibly important. And I'm as left brain as you can get, and I know so many engineers are, that really recognizing that how people interact together is going to be so critical to innovation. And this has just been so proven, groups innovate better than individuals. Absolutely. And we often go back in history and we create these stories about these brilliant, engineers or these brilliant people, inventors. And typically, if you go back, it turns out it wasn't just the one. They got credit for it, but it's typically groups and teams that work together. And recognizing how important that is, I guess, the main thing I'd like people to take away.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for adapting to our organization and bringing your leadership style to us. We're really grateful for it, and we're really grateful for you kicking off this week with us, and we look forward to the keynotes and all the wonderful things we're going to hear about today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great. This is really inspiring to see what this organization has grown into. It's great to see, and again, it's different than a normal kind of upstream community, and it's great to see how it's continued to evolve and grow and created a tremendous amount of value. So it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to be here.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and take care.